At Hedingham Castle, northeast of London, the Earls of Oxford, the De Veres, had been celebrated in the mouths of men for over 400 years. An Earl of Oxford had signed Magna Carta. They had fought with Richard the Lionheart, with Henry V and Henry VI. Oxfords fought on the Lancastrian side in the Wars of the Roses. It was into this famous old family of warriors and power brokers that Edward de Vere was born in 1550. He took on his father's easy familiarity with hunting, riding, and falconry, aristocratic pastimes which furnish so much of the imagery of the plays and poems. In 1561, when he was 11, he watched as Queen Elizabeth was entertained in this great hall by his father's own group of players. And a year later, when his father died, the 12-year-old Earl, now a ward of court, took another step toward the center of the Elizabethan stage. His new guardian was William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, the most powerful man in England. It was the beginning of a tense and difficult relationship that some believe provides the key to the Shakespeare mystery. This is where the Elizabethan age began, in Hatfield on the outskirts of London. It was here that Elizabeth first received the news that she had become Queen of England. In the years to come, she would become Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, a goddess presiding over a golden age. And always behind the throne, there was her chief minister, William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who had now taken Edward de Vere into his care. Burleigh, a sly and consummate politician who controlled the affairs of state for 40 years, also kept a meticulous account of his own household. And this 400-year-old record of his family life is still preserved here at Hatfield.
These are the diaries of Lord Burleigh and some of the letters he received. Quite a few of them written by his ward, Edward de Vere. Letters so well preserved they might have arrived in today's mail. Neat, confident handwriting. These diaries and letters give us glimpses into the life of Edward de Vere. They reveal a passionate, headstrong, thrill-seeking young man, a playboy, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth, but a man who, despite his noble upbringing, hangs around with all sorts of strange characters, and a man who is constantly in trouble. For example, Burleigh's diary for July 1567 says, "About this time, when de Vere was just 17, an undercook was hurt by the Earl of Oxford, de Vere, whereof he died." The cook died. Burleigh goes on to say that the cook ran onto de Vere's sword and it was the cook's fault. But years later, in a letter to Queen Elizabeth, Burleigh hints that it may have been murder. He says he tried to persuade the jury that the death was se defendendo, self-defense.
Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. The friends thou hast, and them...
Many Shakespeare scholars believe that Lord Burleigh was the model for the devious character Polonius in Hamlet, whose most famous speech is his list of rules for a successful life.
Fledged comrade, beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thine ear.
Like Polonius, Lord Burleigh had composed his own list of rules for a prudent life, for his family's use. This was before Hamlet was written. Oxfordians argue that only someone in Burleigh's household, like de Vere, could have seen the rules and used them as satire on stage. This was one of Burleigh's rules. He that payeth another man's debt seeketh his own decay.
Neither a borrower nor a lender be. For loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee.
Oxfordians believe that Lord Burleigh provided de Vere with exactly the environment and education the author of the plays must have had. De Vere's tutor was England's greatest Latin scholar. He received degrees from both Oxford and Cambridge and then studied law. He became a favorite at court and even married Lord Burleigh's daughter. This picture of Parliament shows Queen Elizabeth on her throne, Burleigh at her right hand, and de Vere holding the wand of office of the Lord Great Chamberlain. Oxfordians also say Shakespeare was a natural pen name for de Vere. They point to the fact that he was once saluted at court with the toast, "Thy countenance shakes a spear," and to de Vere's coat of arms.
The memory of Edward de Vere.
Edward de Vere.
The de Vere Society Charity Ball. From both sides of the Atlantic, the colorful champions of de Vere have converged on London to support the cause. Their leader is a 23-year-old descendant of the Oxford line, Charles Vere, the Earl of Burford. And despite appearances, the business of the evening is a literary revolution.
It's very easy to say Shakespeare is Shakespeare and then to laugh at anyone who says otherwise. But the issue is a lot more complicated. I would like to say something of the Earl of Oxford. He was a great and maverick intelligence. He was a law unto himself. Yes, he fell on hard times, but he was a cousin of the Queen, and he also had a claim to the throne after her. He believed that he would become Edward VII. He signed his signature with 7 little dashes underneath, which he dropped once James I came to the throne.
Of course, to some extent, these ignorant people are really motivated a bit by snobbery. You see, they think that only an earl or a duke could really write plays like that. Well, you and I know what rot that is. It's always the clever grammar school boys who write the plays. You know, like Christopher Marlowe, or Ben Jonson, or Nash, or Robert Greene, or any of them. The plays are never written by an earl.
When looking for who Shakespeare was, you're already dealing with a very small section of society, and those inevitably are noblemen who had the best tutors of the day, who were well educated and so on. And the Earl of Oxford has all the academic and intellectual qualifications for being Shakespeare.
If it was de Vere, if it was Edward de Vere, why wouldn't he have owned up to it?
People don't seem to understand that if the Earl of Oxford died knowing that he would be recognized as Shakespeare in his time, he would have considered that a slur on his name, and he would have known that his family would have been dishonored.
Oxfordians believe that although their man couldn't acknowledge that he was the author, he left clues throughout the works. More than 100 of the sonnets are written to the Earl of Southampton. Stratfordians say Southampton was Shakespeare's patron. But de Vere had a more definite tie. Southampton was also a ward of Lord Burleigh, and at one point almost married de Vere's daughter. Sonnet 125, "Wert aught to me, I bore the canopy." To Oxfordians, the line makes sense, because de Vere did bear a golden canopy over Queen Elizabeth during celebration of the victory over the Spanish Armada. Several sonnets speak of old age and imminent death. De Vere was nearing death at the time the sonnets were written. Shakespeare was still in his 30s. Sonnet 76, "Every word doth almost tell my name." A possible pun on the name E. Vere. For centuries, biographers have used the sonnets to light the dim past of the Stratford man. Now they're being used by Oxfordians to reveal an entirely different person.
The Earl of Oxford was quite talented. He knew Italian, been to Italy, and he wrote just a few poems. He never wrote a single play. And he really became a most frightful lightweight. He was married to the daughter of the great Lord Treasurer, whom he treated awfully badly, because in point of fact, he was a roaring homo, as Marlowe was and as Bacon was. I mean, it's perfectly obvious. William Shakespeare's plays are absolutely full of passionate appreciation and feeling for women. Well, the Earl of Oxford had none. Neither had Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe was only interested in the boys, and Francis Bacon had no interest. He was also another homo. And William Shakespeare, you might say, was almost abnormally heterosexual. He was only interested in the girls. That's quite obvious from all his plays and all that we know about his life.
But the sonnets themselves, you think, are addressed to the Earl of Southampton, even though they appear to be, some of them, love poems.
Yes, of course. But it's really a platonic love, you see. William Shakespeare makes it perfectly clear that he wasn't interested in Southampton sexually at all. Southampton was rather beautiful and rather a feminine young man. We know a great deal about him. And William Shakespeare says in the sonnet, and for a woman wert thou first created, till nature as she wrought thee fell a-doting, and added one thing to my purpose nothing. And since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. They can have you sexually. I'm not interested in that. He was interested in the young man's nature. He had a golden nature. His real passion and infatuation was for the Dark Lady.
The Dark Lady is the subject of Shakespeare's most anguished sonnets. Her identity has always been a mystery. But there was a Dark Lady in Oxford's life, too. Her name was Anne Vavasor. She was 17 when she came to court, at the time when De Vere was estranged from his wife. When Anne bore his child, De Vere found himself jailed in the Tower of London. Was this raw material for the bitter Sonnet 147?
My love is as a fever, longing still for that which longer nurseth the disease, feeding on that which doth preserve the ill, the uncertain, sickly appetite to please. Past cure I am. Now reason is past care, and frantic mad with evermore unrest. My thoughts and my discourse, as madmen's are, at random, from the truth vainly expressed. For I have sworn thee fair, and thought thee bright, who art as black as hell, as dark as night.
Lord Burleigh had put up with his son-in-law's indiscretions, but Oxfordians believe he could not allow the public to learn that plays full of political intrigue and satire were being written by one of the family. So, according to this theory, in 1598, Burleigh and Queen Elizabeth compelled De Vere to hide behind the pseudonym he had used earlier for 2 poems, and that somehow this conspiracy of silence has lasted for 400 years.
I suppose if one is drawn to conspiracy theories, one will come up with a conspiracy and find that answers certain issues and so on. I'm not myself given to conspiratorial thinking. I don't find any grassy knoll in Shakespeare. But I think, in a way, it's an attempt to come to terms with the essential incomprehensibility of genius. How could anyone have written these plays? If genius has its mystery, if it is in essence incomprehensible, people, many of them, will do the best they can to come up with some sort of answer.
I think Hamlet was Oxford, and I don't see how anybody who knows anything about literary creativity can fail to say that the author, whoever he was, has given his picture as Hamlet. This is written from the inside. Things happen in Hamlet not according to a preconceived plot, but as they do in life. And I think Hamlet's death was very much what Oxford had in mind for himself as he drew towards the end.
Horatio, I am dead, thou liv'st. Report me and my cause aright to the unsatisfied. Oh God, Horatio, what a wounded name, things standing thus unknown shall live behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain.